Carol Roth. She is the author of The War on Small Business, a former recovering investment banker, as she likes to say. More and more experts are saying that the U.S. is headed towards a recession. I wanted to get her look at that today. Welcome, Carol.
Hey, Glenn, how are you? And I'm so bummed to hear that Stu spent his vacation thinking about economic collapse. You're supposed to go to the spa and do some water skiing.
So you know, in your book, The War on Small Business, you talk about all the things that, you know, the draconian things that our government did to shut businesses down, small businesses, et cetera. But also, you know, they did all of this extra spending and everything else. And here we are at the end, and they were trying to avoid a recession, and it looks like we're going to get one anyway.
This is the key point, Glenn. I'm so glad you brought it up because not enough people are speaking about this. This was all for nothing. We were told we're going to support the market by printing trillions. We're going to throw trillions into relief. We're going to make all of these decisions, and it's going to help the economy. Well, where are we? We saw a historic transfer of wealth from Main Street to Wall Street. Now we're seeing Wall Street giving those gains back. We have huge amounts of inflation. The consumer's hurting. And at the end of the day, we're going to have an economy that, if it doesn't hit recession, is certainly limping along. So they did all of these things for the outcome that we're ultimately going to have to go through anyway. So, it was all for naught.
Carol, I don't think people understand what is coming yet. And I don't know if you can explain it. This is just my, just common sense here. Looking, China is so backed up. What we went through when we closed our ports and stopped shipping things, that was nursery school, it seems, compared to what we are going to be seeing on the horizon. When does this shutdown of any boats going to and from China, when does that hit us?
Well, I certainly think that it has hit us already, and it's going to continue to bleed into the numbers. I think the big question with China is what's next for China and what's next for the world, and that's sort of the outside case scenario. I mean, there's a really bad case here that I hopefully wouldn't want to start with. It's sort of the possibility versus the probability of some sort of a war scenario. But in terms of...
Wait. Why do you say that?
Well, if you look at the unrest that has been going on, I certainly don't think that was just coming out of nowhere. I think that the chaos is intentional. I think food insecurity and the starvation of hundreds of millions of people are going to end up leading to unrest. And we have about a 30-day window. You may or may not know that the farmers in Ukraine have been planting and trying to get this wheat crop, to be able to come to market. The problem is that the Baltic Sea, which is where all of the cargo containers are shipped out of, is completely surrounded by the Russian Navy. So that has to come out by about the middle of June. And if we don't, that's going to send out a domino effect through all different kinds of countries. You're already seeing a little bit of that, like in Sri Lanka. But you're going to see Kenya, you're going to see Lebanon, you're going to see Chad, you're going to see Niger, you're going to see Cameroon, you're going to see all of these places with, huge populations in many cases not be able to feed their population. We know that is going to lead to unrest. Many of them actually have a lot of weapons. So what does that mean they're likely to do? They're going to probably try and go infringe on somebody else's food supply, and it's just going to end up in the spiral. Or if we have, one of the folks in NATO try to get involved in this Baltic Sea situation and Russia doesn't go for that, that could happen. I mean, there are so many different moving parts. And story in the Wall Street Journal over the weekend is that China is telling members of the Communist Party to pull everything they have, investments, real estate, from foreign places around the world. Why, Glenn, would China be shoring up the Communist Party not having exposure to assets around the world? Well, you can connect those dots, right?
Gosh, Carol, you,
I know.
I mean,
I'd like the most depressing guess.
that is terrifying. Terrifying. And that, does that mean here in the United States, all of the land and everything that they own here, they're telling their people to even here pull it out?
This is the what I read in the journal. There's a piece. I'll actually send it to you because I'm sure you're going to want to take a deep dive into it. But yeah, it sounds like, because of the sanctions that happened with the freezing of not only Russia's reserves, but the confiscation of all of the oligarchs' assets, that they're now warning everybody. Now, that doesn't mean that these folks are going to actually comply and do it, and that they don't have relatives and, shell companies or whatnot. But that just sends a signal to me as why would they not want that exposure unless they were planning to be aggressive and worried that we might put some kind of sanctions on them? And why would we put some kind of sanctions on China? The whole situation there is this outlier, within some period of time that's a bad down case scenario.
So the news that I saw this weekend is the State Department. Now, Pentagon is denying it, but the State Department is out of control. State Department said there are plans for the U.S. to sink the Russian Baltic Fleet. I mean, that is absolutely an act of war if we are even just helping them target these things. But that seems more probable if we are looking at the world starving to death. Yeah,
I mean, it may be trading one level of war for another level of war. And I'm certainly no foreign policy expert. So I'm saying this just, as a person reading the news, not with anybody that has any special insight. But that may be what they're thinking. They need to clear that path. They need to get that food out, because the scope of war that they might have with Russia and all the folks who are aligned against Russia and trying to starve people versus the scope that, if all of these countries around the world are facing starvation, that may be the trade-off. But hopefully, they have about a month, some sort of diplomacy here would go a long way. And I remember when we had a president that was really good at that, and we didn't have these kinds of issues.
I will tell you that I've talked to a friend in someplace in Africa, and he said, we are not being trained for war in Ukraine. We are being trained to protect the governments in Africa, because they're all gonna come down. That kind of chaos, first of all, that's not what our military should be doing. But this kind of chaos, what will that do to us?
Yeah, unfortunately, that's the kind of scenario, because of the proximity, not for us, but for our allies, to the centers of all of these things happening. It seems when we have these really big wars, all the roads lead back to Europe, and Europe's already in a bad situation. And so it seems like that may be the convergence of where it is, and we get dragged in potentially that way. And we all know that war is not a good thing for our national debt, for our economy, for humanity. I mean, there's no good that comes out of this. But it certainly seems like that the powers that be that want to create chaos and want to support, some sort of dislocation in the world, that they're doing a really good job of sussing that out right now.
So I said on the air last week, I would just like to have, in the next 5 years, I'd just like to have the money that I currently have. Yeah. I don't need to make, I would love to make for my retirement, investment that grows. But I'm so afraid, and I've heard this from so many people, they have no idea. If you leave it in the bank, you lose. If you leave it in the stock market, you're going to lose, at least on the short term. If I'm 20 or 30, I leave it in the stock market. Yeah. But if you're my age, going on 60, you're not leaving it in the stock market. But where do you put it?
This is a conversation that's being had, with everybody, even the people at the topmost echelons of society that have all kinds of cash and really will be in a fine place, don't have the perfect idea of where to put it because of all of these risks. And certainly, again, this is not financial advice, but there are some things that you can be at least researching and thinking about. One thing that I wrote about on the Blaze site a couple of weeks ago in response to a question, Glenn, was something that is a savings bond called I-bonds. I don't know if you've heard of these, but this is a government series savings bond that sort of combines a face value and an inflation adjusted parameter to it. And it adjusts every 6 months, but right now it's at 9.62%.
Wow.
And that will adjust based on inflation. Now, the rub is if you go online, and I believe it's treasurydirect.gov, you have to open an account with the Treasury if you want to do it online. The cap is $10,000 per Social Security number per year. And then if you do the the paper piece, which you can do through the IRS, I think there's a $5,000 cap. But that's at least, if you have a few years because you get a penalty, I think it's after 3, you have to keep it in for like at least 3 years, and it does readjust. But if you want to have at least some inflation protection, you can look into doing something like that. Certainly as a hedge to your portfolio, as we've talked about many times, having, precious metals, having gold and silver as a hedge, particularly for that, downside scenario, I think is really important. If you have the opportunity to invest in property and land, some land has tax benefits. So talk to a tax attorney. That's an opportunity.
I have to tell you, I think that I think most people are now starting to say, how am I going to, Carol, let me take a quick break and then come back and ask you, what does it mean to our economy if we hit $6, which I think we will this summer, $6 a gallon gasoline? If we hit $9, $10 a gallon of diesel, what does that do? Carol, if we have $6 a gallon gasoline for 3 months, I don't know how the average person makes it.
Yeah, it's really tough scenario, and it's tough on an individual level, and it's tough on the entire economy, which has a spiraling impact because we have a 70% consumer-based economy. They are assuming the fact that we are going to avoid a recession on the back of the consumer, which means that your savings are going to go down, your debt is going to go up. And so they save the economy by putting the consumer in a bad position. And that is just completely not okay. I
want you to explain that. Say that again, because I think people really need to understand the idea of not going into a recession. The Fed is intentionally impoverishing the average American. That's their plan.
Yes, it's on the back of you. They are looking to the average American consumer to save them from what they have done. Either way, it's a bad outcome for the consumer. But if you save them, it's because you have wound down your savings. It's because you've increased your credit card and other debts in order to continue to spend so they can say, look, we were able to save the economy. So it is on your backs. We are the ones that are carrying them, and they are not being held accountable for all of this damage and all of this destruction that they have done, which was entirely intentional and entirely unavoidable.
So I learned this during the collapse of 2008, that the West is not mathematically built to tolerate $100 to $120 a barrel for oil for very long. The whole thing, all the math just starts to fall apart. I don't know what we're paying per barrel, but I know what gas is costing. And when rich people are saying, holy cow, the average person is counting their pennies and their nickels and their dollars and deciding where to go. How long does this last before you're spending all your money just on food and gas?
Yeah, I think this is a question of the haves and have-nots, and we've talked a little bit about this before, is that economists and the folks at the banks, when they talk about the consumer, that's a composite, that's an average that is brought up by the very wealthy that are doing very well. But for the average American, they are not going to be doing well. And we've already started to see this in the numbers from places like Target and Walmart in the last quarter, not just, we're sitting in this quarter right now. This was last quarter. People are starting to make those trade-offs, the things that they absolutely need to have versus the things that they would like to have. And I think, unfortunately, for many Americans, that's going to be the scenario for quite some time. Definitely this year, probably into next year, and depending on what happens on a geopolitical front, maybe even longer, is that you're going to be focused on the necessities, the things that you need to get by, and the rest of that is going to go by the wayside. The skinniest kid at fat camp bright spot here, Glenn, is
dollar.
that at least, well, not the that's not in a recession plan.
Okay.
That's actually works against us.
Oh, yeah,
but
true.
Of all the things that we have where there's a supply and demand imbalance, at least in food, we may not have choices here, but at least there will be something to eat. That supply demand imbalance around the world, again, as we talked about before, means that there are going to be other people who are facing the same kind of issues, and they're not going to be able to eat.
And that includes everybody south of our border. And with an open border, it could get very ugly very fast. Carol, thank you so much. I appreciate it. I think the thing that really we all need to take away is the next 10 weeks is crucial. Does Ukraine, do the farmers get all of that food out into the Baltic Sea without Russia obstructing it or us going to war? If they don't, there is going to be massive starvation in Africa and all kinds of chaos. So the next 10 weeks, pray for the Baltic to open up so we can get that food to Africa or wherever it needs in peace. Carol Roth, thank you so much. We'll talk again.